Some stories aren't told. They awaken on their own. Welcome to Whispers. They assigned Lena to the night shift because she didn't mind the quiet. The observatory preferred people like that, those who could sit inside the hush and let it press against their ribs without needing to fill it with chatter. She had the habit of listening as if silence itself were made of stitches. The servers hummed their thread. The equatorial mount clicked its needle. The desert wind slipped under the eaves and tied everything off with an invisible knot. On the night the interstellar visitors slid into their feeds, the quiet felt layered, as if a locked closet had been wheeled into the room. A notification light, small and unshowy, winked at her at 2:07. The label said what it always says when the sky flinches: possible transient. When Lena opened the queue, she found a procession of subframes where a faint woolly comma drifted across the stars. It resolved under stacking. Ahead, a pale sheath of coma. A tale that looked, to Lena's trained eye, like a thought unfinished. "Not an asteroid," said Ravi, who had drifted in with his coffee. "Not with that coma." "Not ours," she said. Within an hour, the network lit up. Third interstellar object on record. Hyperbolic orbit. Not gravitationally bound. Someone compared the eccentricity to a thrown door that would never swing shut. Someone else said, "Oumuamua," and smiled, as if naming a thing makes you kin. The object had a temporary designation that would later become 3I/ATLAS, and a trajectory like a grace note. Here, brightening, then gone to places with no name. By night 2, a ritual had formed. Optical arrays watched the faint blur. The radio dish turned its cool ear to the coordinates, just in case the visitor mumbled in its sleep. Lena preferred photons to voices and had said so often enough. But when the senior astronomer asked who could take radio, she lifted her hand. She trusted instruments more than she trusted people, and suspected the dish felt the same. Static poured across the waterfall plot. A soft storm that never quite arrived. She would have marked the night unremarkable if not for a tide under the noise. A pressure that did not sound like anything, but arranged the hairs along her arm as if sound had touched them. Pareidolia, she told herself, and saved the stream anyway. When morning canceled her, she stepped onto the observatory's patio and lit a cigarette. She had no intention of admitting to anyone. Above the desert, the object's smeared brightness painted the sky with a faint bruise. Lena found herself thinking a foolish thing. We're curious, not greedy. As if the sky cared for motives. The third night, regularity offended them. A narrow-band thread crawled along the spectrogram with the provocation of a metronome. Nature is full of clocks, pulsars, icy geysers, hearts, but this felt like a clock built by someone who had misheard the story of clocks. The amplitude wavered by the width of a breath. Maya, the intern, leaned in. "It's talking, emitting," Lena corrected, a reflex that felt like superstition in a lab coat. She routed the feed to recording, and to the small room they called control, even though it controlled nothing. The waterfall plot showed the thread like a strand of hair caught in a stream. Something in it repeated with a patience that belonged to machines, and a clumsiness that belonged to people. Ravi frowned. Why does the amplitude peak there? He circled a half-degree offset from their beam center, trailing behind the object like a shadow trying to remember how to be attached. Geometry, Maya guessed, or jets, or an artifact. They were careful with the word artifact. It can mean a thing made by hands, or a mistake made by instruments. The room preferred the second, leaping meaning. They argued, they saved. They wrote their cautious email to colleagues with phrases like preliminary, uncertain, additional calibration required. Lena stayed back to close the loop. She shut down channels and labeled files, and reached to kill the monitor audio. That was when the speaker, turned down to a volume that should not have moved the air, exhaled something shaped like a syllable. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't grammar. It was the impression of her name, pressed into the hiss the way a thumb presses into clay. She stilled. It came again, lighter than dust. Her hand slammed the knob to 0. After the click, the room felt too crowded for the number of people in it. She locked the tape. She did not lock the part of herself that knew the shape of her own name. Sleep came like a fall down an unlit stair. On the day couch that punished spines, Lena dreamt. Not a picture, but a temperature. The exact chill of the server room. She stood at the lip of a crater so broad the far rim was a rumor. The air tasted like old batteries, and the sugar dust of cheap candy. Across the basin something moved, not because it needed to change position, but because motion declared intention. When it stopped, the silence had weight. She woke with her wrist in her teeth. No one at the observatory talked about dreams. They talked about duty cycles and bad weather, and the mistake other teams were surely making. But when Lena returned to the Kyle, Maya had fallen asleep with her head on her notebook, and her hand had wandered in her sleep across the page. One word, written 4 times as if the pen had been steered by a current, not a hand. Remember. The 4th night the world arrived on a delay, as it always does. Headlines that said, "Alien Visitor," with a smile. Press releases that said, "Interstellar Object," with a frown. A talk show host asked whether 3i/ATLAS could be a spaceship, and then didn't wait for the answer. The chat window on their public stream filled with hearts and thumbs and certainty. Lena closed the chat. She preferred the kind of listening that did not need to perform itself. Someone, somewhere, decided they should say hello. It was almost ceremonial. They composed prime numbers inside a small amplitude cough and pushed it into the sky like a paper boat into a canal. The dish complied. The desert watched. The answer did not come from above. It bled up through the floor with a shyness that made it worse. A ghost frequency rose from the ground into their array, thin enough to pass for power noise until you considered the rhythm. 3 steady pulses, a pause the size of a human breath. 3 more. Another pause. The room turned its head like a dog. "Ground loop," annoyed Lena said automatically, as if naming the error corrected it. They unplugged, grounded, regrounded, walked the racks, isolated the culprits one by one until the instruments were clean and the air felt newly washed. When they measured again, the pulse persisted. The waterfall wore its hairpin, stubborn and well-combed. "Should we answer?" Maya asked, whispering like the room had become a church. "We already did," Ravi said, and his mouth was so dry Lena could hear the sound of his tongue leave his palate. Agencies followed the signal in wearing badges that were also names: space, defense, security, energy. Their manners were excellent. They said collaboration as if it were a room they were happy to enter. Colleagues sent emails with elegant syntax and a faint whiff of, "Please don't embarrass us." The senior astronomer spoke on a podium before a camera and said extraordinary claims and instrumental coupling and hypothesis space, and did not say fear. Perhaps he wasn't afraid. Lena was. Not of harm, of intimacy. Because at home, the hum had learned her address. The refrigerator motor repeated the pulse at a fraction too slow to ignore. The phone buzzed the rhythm when a message came. The building across the street turned on its lights one by one, and between the rectangles of yellow, she counted the sometimes beautiful, sometimes awful three-and-breath beat of a thing that could find her in the wiring. She stopped answering calls. Her mother left a voicemail saying her name, and in the thin lace under her name came her name again, uttered in a voice she did not yet have. They mapped the period drift as if charting a river that refused bridges. It slewed around ratios that meant nothing except to minds that counted close to their own bodies. 5/3 of a breath, 7/5. Irrational and somehow neighborly. Another group claimed the visitor's light curve brightened when the pulse fell silent. A third group scolded them in a preprint that softened its blows with robustly and insufficiently. A popular streamer, shirt tight and smile confident, declared the object a wake-up bell for the species, donated links in the description, asked viewers to like and subscribe. He would sleep fine forever. He had never lived beside a dish. The 7th night the thread forked. 2 harmonics braided down the display, high and low. The lower carried a notch the size of a human apology. When Lena swallowed, her throat made the notch. Maya anchored her shaking pen and wrote, "Remember" again without looking. Ravi stared at the floor as if listening for a heartbeat through concrete. Something below them listened back. The slab that held the dish vibrated at a frequency their tools did not catch, but their bones did. It traveled up through the soles of their shoes and into their calves and higher. The building settled around the hum like an animal lowering itself around a litter. When the signal from the sky paused, the ground thrum completed the sentence with a patience that belonged to geology. A picture began to assemble itself in the spectrogram the way frost ferns onto cold glass. It wasn't numbers or primes or anything arrogant, more like the pattern of footsteps of people walking beside one another, when they disagree about pace but agree about destination. Lena felt the image arrive in the wrong sense organ. It laid itself behind her eyes as if her ear had grown an eyelid. A curved corridor. Doors that didn't want to be called doors. Surfaces that wanted to be called language without being read. When she stared directly at them, the picture collapsed like bread under a fist. Underneath, spectral lines bloomed. The ordinary miracle. Not water, not CO. not the simple breath of cold things. Heavy elements arrhythmic enough to count as a personality. Isotope ratios like fingerprints. Chemists would feast on the data for months. The agencies would publish, argue, fund, and refund. The world would incorporate the findings into its running myth about what it was like to be alive in that year. None of it relieved the room. On the 9th night, Lena went outside and leaned her shoulder to the dish's girder. Cold bled through her jacket. The steel hummed under her blade. She asked the darkness a question she did not write in the log. "What do you want?" The answer arrived as a memory that did not belong to her. A round room with no corners. A knot table that occupied the place a table would. A shadow beneath it like an eclipse viewed through smoked glass. The smell of dust and storm and sugar. A hand, her hand, free of the small white scar a dog had given her when she was 12. When the wall remembered to be a wall, it was a sky. And in that sky their sun wore a thin, pale ring like a wedding band lost in a sink. "Without a map," said a knot voice. "All roads are vows." Back inside, she touched the console and flinched. The room had rearranged itself around the sound. Maya's eyes were soft with unslept dreams. Ravi's hands were steady like a person holding a lit match in a wind. They recorded and recorded. They knew what they were. The people who put light inside boxes to be replayed by other boxes later. When the feelings had settled down, they aligned, they stacked, they folded, they reversed. When they reversed, the thread in the hum shaped a syllable in the way a shoreline shapes a wave's collapse. It was a word. It was small, almost thrown away. The kind you say when you arrive at a door you did not know you had been walking toward all day. Home. Maya covered her mouth with both hands the way a child does when joy and terror collide. Ravi leaned forward until his forehead kissed the console. Lena did not do anything dramatic. She felt the floor choose to remember walking, the concrete remembering feet, then forgetting, then remembering again. They did not transmit. The rule said no. The agencies had come with their lotions and gentle voices that still said no. Still, in a moment Lena would later regret and also be unable to imagine not taking. She pressed the talk button with the transmitter off and put her mouth very near the mic as if intimacy could travel across a broken path. "Who are you?" she said to the dead channel. The building answered. Not from the speaker. From under her hand, through the girder, through the slab. The deepest yes the earth can offer. The hum shifted. For her, for the shape of her bones. The word that came was the word under names, the oldest noun. Home, it said again, but tenderly, like a correction. She asked because questions are a way to place yourself. How many? No number would have been small enough. The pause that followed gathered leaves. Then the concrete under them, patient and absolute, translated the only answer their language could bear. All remembered. The dish remembered hands with old grease. The building remembered blueprint. The copper remembered lightning before it was wire. The desert remembered water. The humans remembered a corridor they had not walked yet. A ring around a sun like a promise never formally made. The 10th night came in wearing the same stars as every night. The object brightened a shade beyond predictions, then dimmed, like a person adjusting their speech to be understood. The two threads braided until the waterfall became a curtain, and the curtain a threshold. The agencies would, later, issue statements that were correct in all ways that can be corrected on paper. The object was a comet-like body from interstellar space. Outgassing explained this. Geometry explained that. Instrument coupling accounted for the rest. The ground hum, mystery for the ages, would be studied, modeled, explained, and left a little unexplained like all good mysteries. Conferences would be scheduled. Panels would be paneled. The world would say, "We learned something." Full stop. But inside the room that night, the hum discovered Lena's skull like a tuning fork discovers a note. The braid slowed until the period matched the arc of a human breath. Maya, undone by that intimacy, began to cry the way a person cries when a lullaby reminds them of a parent's voice. Ravi whispered a prayer in a language Lena did not recognize and did not need to. "Teach me," Lena thought, and did not say aloud. The dish's hum changed, like a teacher drawing a circle around a problem. The ground used the silence to complete a sentence the sky had begun. Together they offered a shape that was not quite map and not quite oath. Their planet's orbit, the long, slow nod of its axis, the procession that makes calendars and harvests and birthdays matter. Doorways in time, appointments, promises older than speech. It was not a promise to return. It was the certainty of nights. Lena opened her eyes. The display looked like a lake at noon. Numbers swam. The visitor wore its faint blue hood and walked its path out of their neighborhood. They would lose it to glare, and catch it again, and lose it forever. They would write the paper, and defend the sanity of the paper, and watch their names go on a citation list that would someday be read by a graduate student at 2 a.m., who would feel, briefly, that time had braided a thread around their wrist too. Lena typed a line into the log because logs are how institutions remember what feelings try to erase. Signal persistent. Narrowband period tracks human breath. Sources, above and below. Content, provisional. Home. She rinsed her mug in the sink, and the sink replied in a tiny, resonant ring that said, in its way, "You are listening." She touched the girder one more time, cool, purposeful, and felt the slab answer with a last patient tone, like a hinge opening in a house someone else built for you before you were born. They put her on nights because she didn't mind the quiet. After 3 I/ATLAS, the quiet was full. Streetlights beat in the visitor's rhythm as she drove home. The elevator motor carried the braid. The refrigerator stitched it to the morning. In bed, with the city's slow pulse beyond the glass, she let her breath match the measure they had learned together. Somewhere under the observatory, stone breathed once with her. Somewhere beyond the edges of maps, a smudge of coma did the same. The word they had offered was small, and it was enough. The story that would go to the world would be careful and correct. The one the building learned would be wider. It would remember that human voices are instruments tuned to the size of rooms. It would remember that deserts used to be seas and sometimes miss it. It would remember that the first syllable most infants master is a call and an answer at once. Lena closed her eyes and did not fall asleep. She listened. Morning came the way it always does. Gradual, then all at once. There would be maintenance for the dish and monitors for the slab and meetings for the agencies and headlines for strangers. There would be colleagues to soothe, interns to teach, notes to archive, coffee to carry like incense to the mouth of the building. There would most of all be nights. She would stand beneath the dish again, palm on steel, soft with the knowledge that the universe had found a way to lower its face to hers without making her smaller. She would ask the only question she had not yet asked out loud. A question without coordinates. Will you come back? The answer, traveling up through concrete and out through sky, shaped by two throats that had learned each other's timing, would not be yes. It would be a map. It would be the curve of their orbit, and the patience of seasons, and the rhythm by which a species learns to keep watch. It would ring like the smallest bell you ever heard, the kind that makes you turn your head without meaning to. It would tell her what all good stories tell their listeners, that quiet is a mouth, and listening is how you speak back. And what comes from the dark is not always a stranger. She would log the time and the amplitude and the drift, and then she would go outside to the desert that remembered water, and breathe in the rhythm the visitor had taught the ground. Somewhere above her shoulder, 3I/ATLAS would go on its brief shining toward elsewhere. Ordinary in the way miracles look when you've stared too long. Somewhere below her feet, the slab would hum the note that means door. Between the two, in the place rooms are made, a word would go on being said softly enough to be missed by anyone who did not like the quiet. Home. The story ends here, but they don't stop watching. Before you go, subscribe, like, and share, or the whispers may follow you home.